Hi there, I'm Deep Dillon. Welcome to your AI Injection, the podcast where we discuss state-of-the-art techniques in artificial intelligence with a focus on how these capabilities are used to transform organizations, making them more efficient, impactful, and successful. Welcome to this week's episode of your AI Injection. So this week we've got with us Bharath Modayur. Bharath received his PhD from the University of Washington, where he is currently an affiliate assistant professor. We've got Bharath on to chat with him about his startup Early Markers, which is leveraging AI technology to detect developmental issues in infants. All right, Bharath, thanks so much for being here. And I'm super excited to talk about Early Markers. Let's get started. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your early inspiration for the project?
First of all, it is exciting to talk to you guys. It's always been, I always get supercharged after these conversations. And typically I need a booster conversation like in a few weeks. So this is exciting. So I'm quite excited to talk to you about this. The short story is that my expertise is, I'm a computer vision guy, mid-90s PhD from the University of Washington. And there was not really that many avenues to use, the skills that you learn from grad school, computer vision at that time, to something practical. So I hadn't done much with computer vision for earlier part of my career. And right around 2012 or so, there were some demos at the University of Washington Electrical Engineering Department. And they were doing pose estimation on adults. So just figuring out where the body joints are of adults moving around, and typically in the upright position. And they were, they had applications for surveillance and suspicious activities, et cetera. And that let us spark. And I did a proposal to DARPA at the time to develop something along those lines. And the ideas were accepted. And then we realized that you're kind of transferring all your IP over to DARPA. And it's not something that I really understood. So backed off a little bit, and some mentors in my circle kind of pushed me towards healthcare and the UW Autism department. And so I hooked up with the researchers there and looked for ways where we can use computer vision, video processing to look for early markers, early signs of autism. That was kind of the germination of the idea. And it's kind of, the key thing being that there was a lot of anxiety, especially for parents that already have a child with autism, and the younger sibling, the likelihood goes up to 17% if your older sibling is diagnosed with autism. And so how can we help them look for signs early, and, and what can parents do at home to engage with a child to develop these skills like motor skills and social skills? So that was kind of the idea.
Walk us through what's the benefit of early diagnosis first, and then what are the markers you're looking for through the video signal, and how do they actually predict, these? Right.
So we have branched off from looking for something very specific to autism to generalize developmental atypicalities and developmental delays. That's what we're focused on. But in general, early detection can lead to early intervention. And early intervention is certainly linked to better health outcomes. So for instance, 15 to 20% of children have a developmental or behavioral disability or disorder, and only a third of them get diagnosed before they enter the school system. And early detection and early intervention can save the society up to like $100,000 in social service costs. So that is kind of the motivation for, looking for delays and looking for markers early so that you can get to a diagnosis and you can get to intervention early. It's a better health outcomes, and you save money as well. The markers, like for instance, again, I want to be clear about the fact that markers are not diagnosis, right? I mean, just because you find something that is a marker for, diabetes, doesn't mean that you have diabetes. So there's that's a distinction that we typically have trouble with when we write NIH proposals, that, the conflation of markers with diagnosis. We have to be very clear about what is what. So the markers that we can see very early on, the earliest markers that you can typically see are motor related, right? I mean, social and communication skills come later for the infant. And the motor markers that are linked to autism and specifically are like, delayed development, and less time spent in advanced postures like tummy time, that is linked. And then later, you have atypical gait, asymmetry. And there is this, again, it was not a big study, but it gave tantalizing clues about how the infant lying down in the crib, and you look at the posture of the infant to see whether it is symmetric or asymmetric. And the more time the kid spends in asymmetric poses in the crib is correlated with higher risks for autism. So these are markers. Again, it's just something to look out for, and cumulatively they lead to a specific condition. And there is motor is interesting because there are a lot of development in other domains that cascade from development of motor skills. They call it like the sticky mitten experiments, where they attach something to the infant like 3 to 5 months old, something like a Velcro glove, if you will.
Okay.
It allows the kid to reach and essentially grab even before they have skills to grab. And then longitudinally, they look at these 3-month-olds that have been trained to reach for things and how they develop at 13 to 15-month-old. And they find that their ability to explore objects is clearly improved because of that early training. It kind of shows that there's a causality where motor development leads to development of other domains like language and communication and social interaction. Just the ability to sit independently and point to things, that kind of like it improves social bidding. It leads to interaction with the adults, and just the ability to crawl independently and later walk allows the baby to explore the environment and interact with the environment. And just those interactions drive development in other domains. So motor development is kind of pivotal. And from computer vision perspective, it's also convenient for us to passively look at a baby and glean things instead of actively fitting them with wearables and stuff.
So before we kind of dig into the how are we doing this with machine learning part, how does autism typically get diagnosed today? And what role does this kind of infant level behavioral analysis play, or postural analysis?
Typical diagnosis is on average, I think it's like 3+ years, even though diagnosis can be performed at 18 months. So, I mean, if we're not talking about autism specifically, it is earlier things that you can find in terms of delayed achievement of milestones. It just keeps the parent engaged, so that during well-child visits or just through observations and interactions, the parent is able to look for these early signs, right? So, and that is especially crucial for a parent that already has a familial history of autism, that they can look for these early markers, if you will, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds though like you're saying, I'm kind of reading between the lines, but I'm not clear. So I think the thesis here is that people are not identifying these conditions early enough, and that there's a gap between when they're actually being identified today, because maybe there are some parents who have a first child or earlier child that has a condition, so they know to look for it, but there's a lot of folks who don't. And that if we can identify these folks, because we can make it lower cost, and they don't need to
convenient.
Convenient. They don't necessarily need to know ahead of time what to look for, and then to take them into their physician and get maybe routed to some kind of behavioral, occupational specialist or what have you. Is that basically the point here?
Yeah, the convenience and the passive observation, and not really expecting the parent to know everything, and guiding the parent through activities at home that kind of promote development along all these domains, right? So even the diagnosis of autism, it's now possible to do it younger than, say, 10 years ago. But I mean, the parents have to be motivated or concerned for you to get there. Like, for instance, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends developmental screening for infants, especially motor screening. And there are about 6 annual well-child visits that are recommended in the first year of life. And on average, parents make it to 2.2, which means that you're not even being seen by a clinician. And the more tools that we can provide for the parent and the clinician to perhaps even remote consult, and be able to, look at the baby without the parent having to go to a clinic. All of those are kind of lowering the barriers and exposing the child to being observed by a clinician early and often, right? So that
and maybe even for a little more time, because that 15 minutes once every few months observational window might not be enough for the physician to sort of notice anything. Is that
correct? And that kind of goes to the heart of what we have developed, and what we have in the pipeline is about being able to observe the baby in a naturalistic environment, which is home, and being able to observe the baby for longer periods of time and more often, right? So you don't know what the circumstances will be during a clinic visit about the mood of the baby at the time. It's a compressed time frame, and there are the baby may not be at the best state to express whatever skills that he or she has, right? So the more opportunity you give the infant to be observed and kind of express their skills, the better off you are in recording something that's more accurate than a clinical setting observation.
You're listening to Your AI Injection, brought to you by Xyonix.com. That's Xyonix.com. Check out our website for more content, or if you need help injecting AI into your organization. Let's change gears a little bit. So for the sake of our audience, we're going to talk about an AI technique called body pose analysis, which, if you think about the human body, you've got all these joints on it. You've got a skeleton that you can lay over that and sort of track over time, so you can sort of see the joints kind of moving across time, and then you can start to do things like assess whether or not there's some asymmetry, like Bharath's talking about, or whether or not a baby is sort of laying down or crawling, etc. So maybe let's start on the skeleton extraction itself, the pose extraction. Like, what are some of the challenges about, I guess, babies versus adults with respect to actually getting the pose out in the first place?
Yeah, I mean they are more varied, different proportions and squishy, if you will.
Yeah, they are pudgy little
And so
guys.
when we started this out, there was a phase one NIH grant, and so we had this idea to be able to recognize, where the baby is and where the baby parts are, where the baby joints are, and what the baby is doing in terms of the specific activities that the baby is engaged in. So that was the thesis. And then we came down to implementing the technology. And so just a brief history is that we approached it from what you would call a classic computer vision, or what they call machine vision approach, where you're trying to look for specific features in the image, like does it look like an elbow joint? Does it look like fingers? And does it look like a face? And then you extract these features, you put them together, and then you constrain them and say that, well, these features can't be just occurring everywhere. So if you're pretty sure that that's the head, that below that will be the shoulder, et cetera. And, you're kind of constrained by the human anatomy. And of course, most of these classic algorithms were written for, people like you and me right now, sitting at a desk or just walking around or doing some common activities. Whereas the observational videos of babies, most of them are not sitting, most of them are not certainly standing. They're crawling around, and there are not enough, examples of crawling around humans for us to work the classic computer vision way. Or later, when deep learning kind of exploded and people are able to do some, previously undoable things, and recognizing animals and people and where people's joints are, et cetera. So the main technical problem that we ran into was we don't have the data. We don't have infant data. And infant data is hard to come by. It is for obvious privacy reasons. You don't find a whole lot of them on YouTube. And so what we decided to do was to do our own study, and we recruited and imaged 68 infants in a 1 year period. And we have about like 30 to 40 minutes of data on each one of those infants. And we used Microsoft Connect at that time. So we had not just the color images, but also information about the depth of each pixel in the image. So it gave us additional information. We went through like this extensive period of labeling these images in terms of where the different joints are. That's pretty painstaking. And then, but it's a you can use human resources. You don't need that much training. Everybody knows what a baby looks like and where the baby's joints are. Yeah. So you could get a high school or middle school student to do that. But then comes the second part, which is labeling specific parts of the video where the baby is doing something interesting. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, is the baby rolling over? And there are like three different kinds of rolling over. There are nuances there that only a developmental expert will be able to tease out. And so we use the expert time to annotate parts of the video where specific things are happening. So once you have all that, then we have these deep learning systems that we train on these data to A, figure out where the body joints are, and then B, to see where specific motor activities are taking place.
So part of it is like you can't just go use some off-the-shelf body pose packages and apply them to babies, and get too far, it sounds like. And then
correct.
And then the second part here is once you've got, so you went out, you started gathering your baby data, and then you trained up your own models for pose extraction on the babies, and you've got the ability to track the skeleton. What is it you're trying to do next? Once you've got the skeleton, walk us through the actual poses you're trying to get to, mm-hmm. and some of the challenges, there in getting from the skeleton over time in a video to the postures that you're after, or the
right. So if I can jump ahead and let's see if I can paint a higher level picture of how AI is kind of employed in this particular solution that we're developing, right? So the solution we're developing is for a clinician to be able to do a standardized, a clinically validated assessment, which is objective. It is not really just looking at the baby and looking at a checklist and saying, well, is the baby is 5 months old, so is the baby rolling over? Yes or no? And you ask the parent, and those are like questionnaire-based assessment of the child, not as accurate as something that it is observation-based and that uses a clinically validated tool. So what we are trying to do is, see whether the parent themselves can do the conduct of this or the administration of this test. So think of it as a clinical test that the baby goes through, which is just all passive observation by an expert and occasionally facilitating movement. You can't just ask the baby to do something. So you have to provide some cues, rattle some things, and give some enticement so the baby crawls or rolls over or reaches for stuff, right? So right now that is done in a clinic under the clinician supervision. And then they look at how the baby behaves, and then they score the baby. And then you get a score, and then you get a percentile ranking. And then you figure out whether the baby needs further evaluation or specific intervention, or everything is going fine. Let's see you again during the next well-child visit, right? So that's how it happens. And so our first idea was, can we have the parent do it at home over time? So we kind of split this assessment into administration and evaluation, okay, and made them asynchronous. They don't have to take place at the same time. And for administration, our key idea is, can we just have the parent do it? Yep. And so the first part of the AI there is for the app to be running on a tablet or a laptop or a phone. It recognizes that the baby is, for instance, on its back. And so there are a set of cues now you can give the parent, either typically through voice guidance, where it can tell the parent, hey, it looks like, Layla's lying down on her back. So can you rattle something on her left and see if she reaches for it? And then say, can you rattle something on her right and see if she reaches for it? That's an example of figuring something out in near real time as to how the baby's posture is located, and then giving specific ideas and cues to the parent so that they can elicit some movements that is part of this assessment, right? So
there's probably a number of things that kind of go into deciding what the exercises that you provide the parent. There's maybe the age of the child, the
yes,
history of what exercises you already have data for, and which ones maybe you don't. I don't know, anything else that kind of goes.
Yeah, I mean, these are not something that we at Early Markers have come up with. These are standardized tools, if you will, observational tools that clinicians use. Okay. So we're just facilitating conduct of this at home, which hasn't been done. And then the second part is, once you do that, you give the parent about a week, so they don't have to make time and sit down and do something with a baby for 1 hour and be constrained again. That is part of the constraint you have in the clinic, is it's time limited. So we expand the time so you observe the baby longitudinally a little longer. And then so that is the first part of the AI, right? To be able to look at a video at home and be able to tell whether the baby is in one of these canonical poses, if you will. Mm-hmm. Is the baby on its tummy, on a back, or sitting, or standing, or so? And based on that, you give very context-specific cues to the parent to elicit movement from the baby. So that's one part. The second part that we did using a lot of data is that so this particular tool, that a clinical tool for assessment, is called the Alberta Infant Motor Scale. It's called AIMS, AIMS. Mm-hmm. That's got 58 specific motor items. So, crawling, for instance, will be one item, and there are different kinds of crawling, actually. And then crawling to sitting will be another item, and rolling from back to tummy will be another item. So these are examples of, what constitutes those 58 items, right? So for instance, so already you can see that if you give a video of this assessment to an expert, you can assume that the expert knows to recognize any one of these 58 items. So if you want to automate this, you need a system that can classify or recognize any one of these items from video. And that is a Herculean task at this stage. To develop an automation that, machine learning that you can give it one of these arcane items out of the 58 and the machine says, oh yeah, it is item number 17. We cannot do that. So what we have done is reduce the 58 to 15 items. And we show that using just 15 items picked by the machine, you can still do really well. You don't need 58 items. And even within the 15 items, we kind of mash together items that are hard to distinguish, even for an expert. So we'll have expert number 1 and expert number 2 looking at an item and say, I think it is 18. And another expert would say, no, I think it's 20. There's like, is the baby leading with the hip or is the baby leading with the shoulder? And, I have looked at these for several years and I can't tell, but I with good reason, I'm not a developmental expert, but even they differ in whether it is, leading with the hip or leading with the shoulder. So what we did is even combine those items. So for instance, we just have one kind of rolling over. We don't try to distinguish between the various kinds of rolling over. The idea being that it becomes a little easier for the machine to, chronologically see that, yeah, the baby is supine. Hey, now the baby is prone. Very likely the baby rolled over, and it's a supine to prone rollover. I don't know anything else about how exactly the baby rolled over. Was it, leading with a hip or shoulder? The machine doesn't know. But it becomes a little easier to train a system that just says, I found a rollover. I don't know what kind of rollover it was, right? So we use machine learning just to reduce the number of items that we have to recognize to arrive at a score, developmental score for the infant, right? And then the final part of using the AI is, even now we're not thinking full automation where you pump in the video and out comes a score. We are not there yet. That is the goal.
So reminder us again of what exactly is the score and what's the connection between the score and some of the conditions that you might have, like autism or cerebral palsy or et cetera.
Yeah. So there is no cutoff. So the motor score just is like one way of measuring objectively the developmental trajectory as it pertains to motor development of an infant that is derived from a standardized tool that has been norm referenced on like 1,200 infants or something. So you get a raw score, and based on the age of the baby, essentially
they'll fit somewhere on a Gaussian distribution.
Yeah, you get a percentile score, and clinicians typically have a threshold that kind of minimizes, the false positive and false negative rates. And so, for instance, they could use the 10th percentile as a cutoff and say, if you're below the 10th percentile, then we need to have additional, evaluation of the baby, maybe a full battery of tests that not just motor, but speech, communication, behavior, etc. And that takes more resources, more time commitment to do, but it becomes a trigger for kind of triaging further care. So if you're below the 10th percentile, it doesn't automatically mean that
You have a condition that's...
You have a condition, but it is something that warrants further evaluation and further devotion of resources to evaluating the baby.
I'm kind of curious about the flip side. Let's say you're in the, 18th percentile, but you're a concerned mom and you want to intervene anyway. Are there benefits to getting infants more mobile earlier, sort of regardless of these more serious conditions?
I don't know whether it could be controversial to suggest that you need to do that early enough, and there is just one pathway or trajectory of development that's acceptable. I think that is why, it depends on the concern level of the parent, right? And so at least in Washington State, parents can self-refer. You still have to get in the queue, and there are clinics like Kindering Bellevue that will take you and then put you through the full battery of tests. But I think that is one of the benefits of making this convenient, doable at home, and low cost, that you can have a longitudinal observation of the child. Just because you're the 10th percentile 1 month doesn't mean that is your trajectory, right? You need a few data points to see whether your concern is validated. And you don't have to wait for the next clinic visit for you to get additional objective data about your child. So that is kind of the benefit of offering a tool that depending on your level of concern or how proactive the parent is, they can go through this and figure more out based on the data, right?
Yeah.
So the final point I want to make is that instead of full automation, like that's where we're talking about the motor score and the percentile and the cutoffs and all that. The final part of the AI is allowing a clinician or a developmental expert to look at these videos rapidly and be able to arrive at a evaluation report, if you will. Currently, if, for instance, a 30-minute video takes 45 minutes to evaluate, our job is to kind of, iteratively reduce the time that it takes to evaluate the video. Right. So if AI can run through the video in advance, queue up kind of the interesting or salient parts of the video, and then kind of solicit.
You can just have guesses. Like, I imagine you can just make the developmental experts more efficient.
Absolutely. Correct.
Because in this kind of passive observation environment, you could have hours and hours and hours of time where the baby's just asleep, or or maybe they did 10 of this particular type of activity, and you really are into let's call it the minority activity. I don't know, something a little bit different. So then even if the machine's wrong a few times, it's still going to save, in theory, the developmental expert a fair amount of time. And sometimes you may miss something. Like, for instance, we had a practical case like a week ago when a baby's video was scored, and looking at the breakdown of there are these component scores. And looking at the breakdown of the scores, the clinician thought, well, did the baby spend any time at all standing? And it doesn't mean that the baby has to be independently standing. The parent or the clinician may be assisting the baby and seeing whether the baby can bear weight on its legs. And they saw that there was no standing subcomponent score. And that is where the machine could say, hey, here is where the standing parts of the video are. And you don't have to look through a 30-minute video to find where the baby potentially could have been in the standing pose. That becomes like a way for the machine to reduce the videos that you have to look at for you to get a comprehensive evaluation. I'm also just guessing that, due to the limitation of the time, like totally outside the context of the machine learning-based system, but the developmental expert might not get through all of this. Like, they might not get an opportunity to view some like different baby poses in particular scenarios. I don't know, maybe the baby just refused to do something, or is that also some of the benefits of having this kind of long-term passive asynchronous monitoring?
Right. I think that if the longer it's clear that the longer you monitor the baby, the better. But that also makes it impossible for a human even with time on their hands, it's impossible for a human to go through. Like, so you have just increased the complexity and the requirements on the clinician's part to look at instead of looking at a video that's 15 minutes long, now you're saying, well, I have 3 hours of video gathered over 1 week, and it's just simply impossible for a human to look at all of that. And that's where AI comes in for it to just, like you said, eliminate non-salient parts of it and then just look for just a salient part. And if you find that the baby has not spent any time in the sitting pose, for instance, now you have an opportunity to send a notification via the app to the parent saying, hey, we got all the information that we need. We just need a little bit more information about the baby spending time in the sitting pose. So it becomes like a very targeted request to the parent to complete the task, right? So that you can get all the information that you need to finish your evaluation.
Perhaps you're not sure whether AI can really transform your business. Maybe you don't know what it means to inject AI into your business. Maybe you need some help actually building models. Check us out at Xyonix.com. That's Xyonix.com. Maybe we can help. What's been your biggest challenge? And maybe there's a technical one and maybe a non-technical one, but what's been the thing that sort of surprised you? Because as I'm sure you know more than many, that it's hard working with video, especially when you have very long time horizons. Just the sheer compute power required to train up these models, and you're not even talking about frame level only.
Right.
Insights. You're talking about activity analysis, which is kind of very much at the forefront of machine learning these days. What's been maybe let's just start with the technical problem. What's been the hardest on the technical problem front, and then maybe same question on the non-technical front.
I think that it's what we're doing is kind of at the intersection of technology like AI and the behavioral aspects of these, what you would call a behavioral tool that is used to assess infant development, right? And finding that the instruments themselves are quite complicated, and it seemed like a daunting task, like I referred to earlier. It just seemed like when we started this project that do we have a product if we don't automate extraction of these nuanced, complicated activities from videos of persons that kind of look like a blob, right? I mean, it just seemed like an impossible task. And our solution to those challenges have been to kind of pare down the tool itself that is used to assess the infant's development, and that took a lot of time. And then the generation of data itself has been a long process, right? And as you can imagine, we have more data for the post estimation because we have like 1 million plus frames of data. Each one of them with roughly about 10 key points, right? Body joints. So we got a lot of data on that. So we have a system that can detect the baby's pose and the body joints with a great degree of accuracy. What we don't have is that many samples for activities because it is you can't get that many samples for, even when you look at public open source databases on human activities, they're not as numerous as samples for image classification, right? So getting these activity database has been challenging, but I think we are in a good place with we have several thousands of samples of these motor activities. But then when you look at specific activity, you can say, well, for how many samples do we have for activity number 24 out of these 58? And for some activities, we may just see like 50 samples because infants don't really do some of these activities, or you're not lucky enough to capture them often enough on camera, right? So
yeah.
that is kind of the challenging part. And generation of these samples requires expert time, and that is expensive, right? So our innovation has been to not rely on, complete soup to nuts automation, but what we call augmented AI, where you have an expert in the loop, but you're just trying to make that utilization of that expert's time efficient, so that their throughput can go up, right? And then also we innovate in terms of making things asynchronous, so that if you have a pediatric occupational therapist that's got an hour on a Saturday afternoon, they may be able to just look at the queue of things, the videos that they have to look at, and it's already been processed by AI, and they can just probably whip through like 3 infant assessments in a 30-minute time slot, right? Cool. So that we can bring a lot of efficiencies there and build something that is, immediately usable in 2021, as opposed to waiting for complete automation in 2025, right?
So Bharath, let's fast forward 5 years, even maybe 10 years out, and talk to that new mother who's got their first child, who's nervous about their child's development. What is your system going to give that, that mother, and why is their life kind of better off, using your technology?
It's a brilliant question, right? I mean, to be honest, we never really thought of this when we started out the project, and then we went through this NIH program called Innovation Core. It's like a boot camp for entrepreneurs, and you go and talk to like 100 plus stakeholders, and many of them are like people that have pain points that you're trying to relieve through your product, right? And it's not always the clinician, it's mostly the parent. What our vision is to have passive observation of the infant at home, kind of blending into the hectic lifestyle of a parent with a newborn in the household. And just be able to give them frequent information about the developmental trajectory of their child, but more importantly, give them something to do. So there are specific activities that parents can do to engage with a child, even when they are like less than 3 months old, in terms of verbal communication, social interaction, and motor development. A lot of simple activities that a lot of parents know instinctively, and a lot of parents like me, for instance, I didn't know instinctively. But many of these, what you would call exercises or activities are something that parents may be doing already, but it's just like our vision is to be able to observe the baby, and based on the activities and the milestones achieved of that specific infant or emerging skills of that specific infant, have targeted, activity plans that the parent can participate in. We started developing this idea, and its early versions of it is on our website, earlymarkers.com/minutes. It's called Motor Minutes. It's like real short, bite-sized videos, like 30 seconds or a minute, that tells you like, so your baby is 6 months old, and these are kind of the skills that you should already be seeing, and these are potentially emerging skills that are happening at this time. And these are activities that you could do as a parent to, kind of propel the baby along those trajectories, right? Or to augment the baby's development. And if something were to happen, or milestones are delayed or being missed, or certain things are not happening, like for instance, a concrete example would be just the amount of tummy time that the baby spends on a per day, per week basis is highly correlated to future development. And tummy time is a hard thing to do for a lot of babies, and it is a hard thing to do for a parent to encourage, because it's just, it's stressful, right? If the baby is crying. And there are some concrete steps that the babies can take. We're developing like these occupational therapy modules or play activities, what we call motor minutes, that can target the parent and allow them to do these specific activities. And then, our system can observe whether the baby's prone time has gone up, right? So those are tangible measures. So you help the parent interact with the baby, augment their development, and give them feedback, right? And then
So to the mom, you're basically saying, look, in 5-10 years in your nursery, you're going to have a developmental expert. The clinicians are going to be in there monitoring your baby and making sure you do just the right thing to kind of optimize their kind of near perfect health trajectory or something.
Right. And we of course rightfully focus on the video signals because that's our domain. But there are also audio methodologies for grabbing and analyzing the baby's vocalizations and conversational turn taking between the infant and the parent. And those are like there are tools that can be used to predict the risks for conditions like autism just based on vocalization analysis, right? And so you don't have to be restricted to just visual analysis, right? So if you have a home nursery solution, it can look at various signal modalities to give feedback to the parent and the clinician.
Awesome. Well, it's been fantastic having you on talking to us about early markers and some of the amazing work that you're doing to make sure kids grow up healthy. And so thanks a ton for coming on.
Thank you. It was awesome and exciting.
Thanks so much for tuning in to your AI injection. If you're interested in reading more about the enabling technology behind early markers, you can check out our website, Xyonix.com. That's Xyonix.com/solutions/body-pose-analysis. And if you like what you're hearing, we're a relatively new podcast and really appreciate your leaving a review on the podcast platform you are listening on. Thanks so much.